Billionaire pretended to sleep to test the housekeeper's daughter. What he saw shocked him. Rain tapped the tall windows of a Beacon Hill townhouse as Boston fell into a late-day hush. Inside, a quiet elevator opened to a private office that smelled of cedar and coffee. Silas Ward, venture financier and a man nobody ever surprised, stood by a wall safe set into a limestone column. He clicked it open. The hinges whispered, revealing stacks of bills and 3 gold bars catching the grey light. In a framed photo, he saw his younger self beside his father in a machine shop, sleeves rolled, faces smudged with grease and hope. "People show who they are when no one's looking," his father had said. Silas built companies on that rule, and once broke a marriage by enforcing it too hard. Down the hall, the vacuum purred, dishes clinked, the doorman's grandson giggled at a cartoon. Today, Maribel Rios had brought her 4-year-old Talia, curls like question marks, big curious eyes, because preschool closed for a plumbing mess. Maribel wore the navy apron she always ironed. Talia wore yellow cleaning gloves because she insisted on helping like mama. If stories that test the heart the way storms test a roof speak to you, stay with me. This one begins with an open safe and a closed-up man. Subscribe so you don't miss the turns ahead. Tap like to help others find this hope. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your city may join the skyline of this tale. Silas left the safe barely ajar and lowered into his leather chair. This was not a test of a child, he told himself, but of a home he hoped to deserve, one that trusted. Maribel had proved steady for months, the spine of the house's quiet rhythm. Yet money bends people like iron to a magnet. Could his space remain a sanctuary? He rehearsed the plan, nothing dramatic, nothing to scare the girl. He would close his eyes and let the afternoon stage itself. If Talia wandered in, as she often did, to show him her crayon sons, he'd see what unguarded treasure stirred, not to trap her but to learn whether his own heart needed softening. He flattened the chair a notch. Outside, a siren wove through wet streets. The office looked like a movie set, lamp glowing low, laptop asleep, a bar of light across the rug. The safe's door was a shadowed mouth holding its gold teeth. Footsteps, light as bird hops, approached. The door creaked. A small face edged in, nose scrunching at leather and lemon oil. "Mr. Silas?" Talia whispered. No answer. He kept his eyelids heavy. She tiptoed in, gloves a beat-up mustard yellow, a size too big. She flexed her fingers like a tiny astronaut and looked from him to the open cabinet in the wall. "Hola, tesoro," Maribel called from the hallway, mild but busy. "Stay near me." "I'm helping," Talia said to the air, drifting farther inside. Curiosity, worry, and a tender warmth rose in Silas. He fought the impulse to sit up. This was about the lesson his father meant, seeing people without making them perform. The washer buzzed. A closet door thudded. Talia reached the limestone column and the steel rectangle at her eye level. She peered in. Gold gleamed, simple as sunlight, bills stacked like quiet, green books. In the window's reflection, Silas watched her profile, thoughtful, serious, the kind of child who lined crayons by shade. She didn't gasp or grab. She hummed 2 unsure notes and rose on tiptoe. Rain drew tiny rivers down the glass. On the credenza sat a jar of peppermints, a photo of Beacon Street in snow, and a bronze lighthouse paperweight. Talia lifted the paperweight with both hands, felt its weight, then set it back exactly. Her eyes returned to the safe. "Is for fixing?" she asked softly. "Door broken?" She glanced at Silas, testing if the grown-up truly slept. He kept still, heart hammering. She pressed a gloved palm to the door. The hinge sighed. The gold bars waited, patient and bright. Downstairs the elevator chimed. Thunder mumbled beyond the rooftops. Silas inhaled slow. The old wood smelled like rain and stories. He remembered a founder swiping a contract off a printer, thinking no one saw, and a receptionist who ran after him to return a wallet he hadn't known he dropped. The world, he'd learned, tips on tiny choices. Talia hovered inches from the treasure. She eyed the hallway, then her own reflection, a small, serious moon in the steel. Her shoulders squared the way Maribel's did before lifting heavy bags. He realized he wasn't testing a child. He was testing whether his home could hold innocence without suspicion, whether he could. From the doorway came her feather-light whisper, "I fix. Mama likes closed things." She reached for the door, and the office phone buzzed, a mechanical dragonfly in the hush, making her jump. She froze, looked at his sleeping face, then at the blinking light as if it were a tiny lighthouse calling ships. The buzz stopped. Silence pooled again. Her fingers curled and uncurled, courage warming like air in a balloon. She inched the door toward the frame until the latch kissed home with a polite click. Then she dragged the leather footstool closer, climbed up carefully, and inspected the smudges her hands had left on the steel. A faint smear of lemon polish glowed. She wiped it with her sleeve, then looked around. The desk, the shelf, the mint jar, until she found a sticky note and a pencil. Tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth, she drew a square like the safe and added a tilted heart above it. She wrote 3 letters she knew by heart, M-A-M. She pressed the note below the safe, the way a mechanic places a sticker after a tune-up. Silas's throat tightened. The note was crooked, the heart wobbly, the message clear. "This belongs to family. I took care of it." His plan's scaffolding creaked and rearranged around a new idea of wealth, one measured in a soft choice made when glitter called. Maribel's voice floated nearer. "Talia? Ven." Talia glanced at the note, then at the sleeping man, and tiptoed to the door, pausing to straighten the rug with the seriousness of a tiny engineer. Her hand found the knob. The knob turned. Then another sound rose from the desk, not the phone but the faint chime of the laptop waking on its own, lighting Silas's face in pale glow. Talia stopped, caught between the door and the light, the safe sealed behind her, and the truth about to step from its waiting. Silas fought the urge to speak. The laptop's glow iced the room. A calendar ping bloomed and died. Talia tilted her head, curls haloed by the window. "You sleeping?" she breathed. He kept still. The rain thickened, drumming like fingers. A timer chimed in the kitchen. The world balanced on her small hand at the knob. She stepped back in, eyes flicking from the light on his face to note on the wall, weighing what to do with a secret she had just made. Silas's heart climbed into his throat as the tiniest rustle sounded near the desk. The note Talia had left beneath the safe clung there like a small guardian, its pencil heart still wobbly, yet firm in its innocence. Silas, though pretending to be asleep, felt his chest thicken with something unfamiliar, something warmer than pride, softer than relief. It wasn't about the gold or the money anymore. It was about what her gesture revealed. Talia lingered, the door half open behind her. She could have walked away, could have left the safe open and never thought twice. But she didn't. She had chosen to guard something that wasn't hers, just because it felt right. Maribel's footsteps padded closer, and the rhythm of her steps carried the weight of long days and countless sacrifices. Silas knew that sound well. Dedication has its own cadence. Talia froze, glancing back toward the hallway, torn between the safety of her mother's call and the magnetic curiosity of the quiet man in the chair. The little girl tiptoed toward him. She studied his face, as if searching for cracks in his performance. His breathing was steady, his jawline relaxed, but her gaze was sharper than most adults gave children credit for. She tilted her head, curls swaying. "You're not really sleeping," she whispered, almost like a secret. Silas didn't move. He had lived his entire life among contracts, strategies, and the unshakable armor of wealth. But never had he felt so close to being discovered by someone so small, someone who could unmask him without even trying. Maribel appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Talia," she said with gentle firmness, "didn't I tell you to stay with me?" Talia looked guilty, then pointed toward the safe with her little gloved hand. "It was open, Mama. I closed it. See?" She tugged at her mother's dress, pulling her closer to show the crooked sticky note still hanging below the door. Maribel's cheeks flushed, as if shame had swept in with the rain outside. "Senor Ward, I am so sorry," she stammered, lowering her gaze and tugging her daughter's arm. "I promise she didn't touch—" Before she could finish, Silas finally stirred. He opened his eyes slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of the moment settle like dust in the golden light of the lamp. His lips curled into a small knowing smile. "She closed it," he said quietly. His voice wasn't stern or cold, but calm, like a tide rolling back to reveal a shore. "And she left me something I didn't expect." Maribel looked confused, then saw the sticky note. Her hand flew to her chest and her eyes glossed over. "Dios mío," she murmured under her breath. "Talia." The little girl's eyes widened, uncertain if she was in trouble. "I fixed it," she explained quickly, "because things should be safe. Mama says safe is good." Silas leaned forward in his chair, resting his elbows on his knees. He studied her like one studies a rare painting, each brushstroke, each imperfection making it more valuable. "You did something most adults wouldn't do," he said gently. "Do you know how special that is?" Talia's small voice lifted with cautious pride. "Special good?" "Yes," he said with a firm nod. "Special good." Maribel tugged her daughter closer, still apologizing. "Please forgive her curiosity, Mr. Ward. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." But Silas shook his head. His gaze lingered on the note, then on Talia, then on Maribel. "Don't apologize," he said softly. "You raised her to understand respect, to know what belongs to others. That's rarer than gold." The room was heavy with silence, except for the rain rattling against the glass. It wasn't just about the safe anymore. It was about trust, character, and the unseen values that truly built a home. Talia yawned, tugging off one glove with her teeth, and climbed into her mother's lap. The innocence of her action left Silas unsettled in the best way. He realized that for the first time in years, someone had surprised him, and it wasn't a seasoned businessman, but a child who valued honesty above temptation. Yet, even as warmth filled the office, there was another truth stirring within Silas. He hadn't only been testing the little girl. He had been testing himself, testing whether he was capable of seeing beyond wealth, beyond suspicion, beyond the fortress he had built around his own life. And as Maribel smoothed her daughter's curls, Silas's mind turned over a new question. If such purity existed here in this small act of honesty, what else had he overlooked in people he thought he understood? He leaned back again, but this time his eyes were open, sharp and alive. "Maribel," he said after a pause, his voice carrying weight. "May I ask you something personal?" Her brow furrowed, uncertain if she should nod. But she did, with quiet respect. "I need someone I can trust, not just to clean these rooms, but to help me manage more than that," Silas said, his gaze steady. "And after what I just witnessed, I wonder if trust might already be standing in front of me." The words hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. Maribel blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly, and Talia, half asleep in her arms, stirred just enough to whisper, "See, Mama, safe is good." The room went still, as if waiting for Maribel's answer, an answer that could change everything. The storm outside had deepened, thunder growling like a distant warning. Silas leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Maribel and her daughter. His words still hovered in the air, words that had shifted the balance of the room, words that made Maribel hold her breath. She clutched Talia closer, not out of fear but uncertainty. Her life had been built on routines that offered stability, cleaning houses, saving small amounts, raising her daughter with dignity. But now the billionaire she worked for, a man whose presence had always felt distant and unreachable, had just spoken something that could rearrange everything. "Mr. Ward," Maribel finally managed, her voice steady but cautious. I don't understand. What do you mean?" Silas tapped his fingers on the armrest, his gaze sharp yet soft. "I mean," he said slowly, "that I've seen enough people try to fool me. I've seen greed in places I never expected, betrayal from men who shook my hand and swore loyalty, and yet, here in my own home, I've just witnessed something I never see in boardrooms or deals." He nodded toward the sticky note still clinging to the wall beneath the safe. "Honesty, innocence, integrity." Maribel's lips parted, but no words came. She glanced at the note, then at Talia, then back to him. Silas leaned forward. "I need people around me who won't crumble when temptation shines in their face. people who don't see money as their master. Your daughter proved something today that most adults fail at, and I'd be a fool not to recognize where she learned that from. Maribel felt her throat tighten. She had worked countless jobs where she was invisible, where her labor was expected, but her humanity ignored. Now here was Silas Ward, speaking as though her values, her sacrifices had been seen and they mattered. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Silas replied simply. "I'm offering more than work. I'm offering trust. I need someone not just to manage this home, but to help me with something bigger, and I think that person is you." Her heart pounded. She thought of the bills waiting at home, the rent due, the sacrifices she made to keep Talia safe and happy. This was the kind of opportunity that could rewrite their lives. Yet doubt crept in. Could she step into a world so different from her own without losing herself? Before she could answer, Talia stirred again, rubbing her eyes with her tiny fists. She looked up at Silas and said drowsily, "You can trust Mama, she's the best." The innocence of her words landed heavier than any contract or negotiation. Silas smiled faintly, and for the first time in years it wasn't a guarded smile, but one of genuine warmth. Maribel exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "If you're serious, Mr. Ward, then yes, I'll do my best." Silas nodded. "That's all I ask. Your best. And I'll make sure your best is given the value it deserves." The moment felt monumental, yet beneath it flowed a quiet unease, because trust, once offered, can change everything. And while Silas's intentions seemed pure, the path ahead would test them all in ways none of them could predict. The storm outside cracked louder, rattling the windows as if echoing the weight of the decision just made. Talia clung to her mother's hand. Silas's gaze softened, and in that charged silence a new chapter began to take shape. But even as hope filled the room, a shadow lingered. Not everyone in Silas Ward's world welcomed honesty, and not everyone wanted to see trust take root. Somewhere beyond that townhouse, forces were moving, forces that would soon make this fragile bond tremble. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving Boston washed clean under a pale blue sky. The streets glittered with puddles, and the air smelled faintly of wet brick and budding magnolias. Inside the townhouse, sunlight spilled across the marble foyer like liquid gold. For most, it was just another day. For Maribel, it was the first day of something she still wasn't sure she believed. She tied her apron a little tighter, her hands trembling more than she wanted to admit. Talia skipped ahead of her, wearing her little backpack, even though there was no school that day. The girl hummed to herself, a tune bright and simple, the kind that children invent when the world feels safe. Silas was already awake, seated at the long oak dining table, a French press beside him, steam curling from a porcelain cup. But his expression wasn't the usual unreadable mask of a billionaire. There was something softer in his eyes, as if the memory of yesterday lingered like a song stuck on repeat. "Good morning," Maribel said quietly, unsure how to carry herself now that the balance had shifted. Silas looked up, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Good morning, Maribel. Sit, we should talk." She hesitated, glancing at Talia, who had already busied herself drawing on a notepad she found on the sideboard. "I don't want to intrude," she said, standing awkwardly near the chair. "You're not intruding," Silas replied, his tone firm yet calm. "I wouldn't have asked if I didn't mean it." Slowly she sat, folding her hands in her lap, feeling out of place at the polished table. She had cleaned it countless times, polished every groove, but never imagined herself as a guest here. Silas poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across. "Yesterday," he began, "was more than a test. I needed to see something real, and your daughter showed me something I've been missing for years." Maribel's lips parted. "She's just a child," she said softly. "Exactly," Silas countered. "She's just a child. Yet she carried more honesty in her hands than most men I've done business with in decades. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because of you." The compliment caught Maribel off guard. Praise wasn't something she was used to. Her work was usually invisible, her sacrifices silent. She looked down, hiding the warmth rising in her cheeks. "I only do what any mother would do." "No," Silas said, shaking his head. "Not every mother, not every parent. You've raised her with something money can't buy. And that's why I want you closer to my life, not just as an employee, but as someone I can trust beyond these walls." Maribel's heart pounded. "What exactly are you asking, Mr. Ward?" Silas leaned back, his gaze narrowing as if weighing his words carefully. "I want you to help me manage the people I trust. My home, yes, but also my affairs that require discretion. I don't need another consultant or attorney. I need someone with integrity, someone who won't be swayed by power or money. Yesterday proved that might just be you." Maribel's hands shook slightly on her lap. She thought of bills stacked on her kitchen counter, of nights she'd skipped meals so Talia wouldn't go hungry, of all the invisible sacrifices she'd made. This was an opportunity she couldn't have dreamed of. And yet, fear whispered, was this too good to be true? Before she could answer, the doorbell rang. The chime echoed through the house, sharp and unexpected. Silas's jaw tightened. He wasn't expecting anyone. He stood, straightening his shirt cuffs, and walked briskly to the door. Maribel rose halfway, instinctively pulling Talia close to her. Something in Silas's posture had shifted, alert, wary, the way a man who has too much to lose reacts to surprise. He opened the door. A tall man in a dark coat stood outside, the kind of man whose presence filled the doorway before his words did. His smile was polite but shallow, his eyes scanning the interior like a predator assessing prey. "Mr. Ward," the man said smoothly, extending a hand. "Apologies for dropping in unannounced. I thought we might continue our conversation about the investment." Silas didn't take the hand immediately. His voice was cool. "I wasn't aware we had a conversation to continue." The man chuckled, lowering his hand. "Let's just say opportunities move fast. If you're not careful, someone else seizes them." His gaze flicked past Silas, landing briefly on Maribel and Talia. The smile tightened but didn't fade. Maribel felt her skin prickle. Talia clutched her mother's apron, whispering, "Mama, I don't like him." Silas noticed. His eyes sharpened and he stepped slightly to block their view from the stranger. "This isn't a good time," he said flatly, but the man didn't move. He leaned a little closer, lowering his voice. "Think carefully, Ward. Doors don't stay open forever." For a long moment, the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Then, with a practiced smile, the man tipped his head and stepped back. "Another time, then." He turned, walking down the steps, his polished shoes splashing through puddles until he disappeared into the street. Silas closed the door with more force than necessary, the sound echoing through the house. He stood still for a moment, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched. Maribel's voice was soft, uncertain. "Who was that?" Silas turned slowly, his eyes darker than before. "A reminder," he said quietly, "that in my world, trust is worth more than all the gold in that safe, and it's rare enough to make enemies." The weight of his words settled over the room. Maribel realized she wasn't stepping into a simple job. She was stepping into a world where shadows lingered just beyond the light, and where choices could ripple far beyond what she imagined. Talia looked up at him with her innocent eyes. "Is he bad?" she asked softly. Silas crouched down to her level, forcing a small smile. "He's someone who doesn't understand what's truly valuable. But don't worry, I won't let him hurt you or your mum." The girl nodded, satisfied with the answer. But Maribel knew there was more beneath those words, much more. And as Silas stood again, meeting her gaze with intensity, she realized something undeniable. Their lives had just become intertwined in ways that neither of them could control. And while trust had been the key that opened this door, it was also the very thing that might put them all in danger. By afternoon, the city shook off the storm and gleamed. Ferries stitched the harbor, and Beacon Hill smelled like wet brick and coffee. Inside, Silas briefed Maribel at the dining table, a plain folder open between them. "I meant what I said," he told her. "Not just housekeeping. A steward, someone who keeps this place human." He tapped the file. "I'm launching a trade scholarship in my dad's name. Machinists, welders, fixers. Help me vet applicants quietly. No press." Maribel traced the cardboard edge. "You trust me with that?" "I trust what I saw," he said, "and the one who taught it." Talia colored at the sideboard, bandage sticker on one knee. "Can I draw machines?" she asked. "Only if you promise not to turn the house into a factory," Silas teased. A chime rose from the back hall, a delivery at the service door. "New locks," he said, "upgrading quiet things." The tech wore a canvas jacket with area stitched on the pocket and the brisk competence of someone who likes screws to sing. "Smart cylinder, audit trail," she explained. "You'll know who comes and when without pointing cameras at people." "Respect and privacy," Maribel said. "That matters here." "Rare combo," Arya replied and went to work. The deadbolt clicked clean. Silas chose a passcode, paused on the last digit, and watched a tiny green star blink. He proposed a walk to Charles Street. No driver. They stepped out into sun, the new lock whispering shut. The neighborhood felt newly washed, florist trimming tulips, a violinist under a stoop. Talia hopped around rain puddles, landing on reflections like lily pads. At the market, Silas knew where the tomatillos lived and which rice didn't clump. "My father used to quiz me on prices," he said. "Build it right, buy it right." "Would he have liked me?" she asked, mostly joking. "Because you keep things closed," he said. "Because you open the right ones." On the way back, a black sedan nosed to the curb across the street. The door cracked open, then shut. Damon Kincaid watched them through tinted hesitation and did not move. The message slid across traffic like a draft under a door. "I'm still here." "Ignore him," Silas murmured. "He treats attention like currency." Back home, Arya handed Maribel a stainless fob. "Master access," she said. "Keep it like a lighthouse." Silas thanked her and told Maribel, "Tomorrow let's visit a center in East Boston. They need equipment. Ask what people really need, not what donors imagine." "I'd like that," she said, feeling the offer like warmth under a coat. They cooked together, onions sighing, knife rhythm, Talia drumming a wooden spoon on a bowl. They ate at the island and traded small stories, San Antonio heat, winter trains, toast at night. Between them, something ordinary and rare grew, ease. After dishes, Talia wanted the machine picture story in Silas's office. They curled on the leather sofa under the quiet tick of settling ducts. "Did your dad make golden bars?" she asked, pointing toward the wall safe she'd once closed like a promise. "He made gears and honesty," Silas said. "Gold was never the point." Sleep found her quickly. Maribel lifted the child, quilts rustling from the guest room down the hall. A muted tone floated from the new lock downstairs. 2 short pulses, a pause, then one. Arya had promised alerts. Silas and Maribel froze. It was late. No delivery, no scheduled staff. Silas handed Talia over, voice level and quiet. "Hold her. I'll check." He moved as memory taught. Fast, silent. At the landing, he opened the panel. Lines of text glowed. Remote attempt, denied. Then another. The third came paired with a tag so arrogant, it almost felt childish. Admin. His skin cooled. He called Arya. She answered on the second ring. "Talk to me." "Someone's knocking the lock from outside," he said. "Remote requests, rapid." "I'm in," she replied, keys clattering through the line. "Source is bouncing through nodes." "That's not a porch pirate. That's someone who wants you to know they can knock." "Kincaid," Silas said. "Or a friend," Arya answered. "I'll harden it. Expect another poke. Cameras. Alley and elevator only. Keep it that way. Privacy is a strength, if paired with vigilance." Maribel reached the stairs with Talia drowsing on her shoulder. "Everything okay?" "It will be," Silas said, "because we'll be ready." In the office, he didn't count cash. He reached for a small ledger tucked behind the gold. His father's daybook, grease ghosts on the cover. On one page, a pencil note survived. "Trust your eyes, then your gut, then your people." He set the book on the table like a map. "Tomorrow," he told Maribel, "we go to Eastie at noon. After, I want you to interview 2 long-time vendors. If anyone leaks, we'll feel it in their answers." She nodded. Stewardship, not suspicion. Talia stirred and pinched the Milagro charm at her mother's throat. "Mama," she murmured. "I'm here," Maribel whispered. Silas watched them, and understood the test he'd staged had changed shape. This home wouldn't be a fortress. It would work like a shop. Tools close, rules clear, hands steady. Stars pricked through thinning cloud. Somewhere across town, Kincaid sipped something amber and smiled at a screen that showed nothing but failed entries. He typed a message meant to itch at dawn, a sentence short enough for one line and sharp enough to cut. Silas walked the hall one last time, fingertips grazing cool paint. In the office, the sticky note Talia had drawn still clung to the limestone, peeling at one corner. He pressed it flat. "Special good," he said under his breath, borrowing the child's phrase. His phone vibrated, the soft system chirped from the new lock, then the bright arrival of an unsaved number. The preview showed 5 words and a tiny promise of trouble, hanging there like a thin wire stretched across a dark doorway, waiting for morning and the first hurried step. He didn't open it. Not yet. He set the phone face down, as if refusing to let a stranger choose the hour of his fear. Instead, he fetched a pad and wrote in blunt, practical lines, "Meet the center director, audit staff access, ask Arya about a decoy account." He underlined people twice. From the guest room came the small, steady sound of a child sleeping, the ribbon that held the day together. Maribel stood in the doorway, haloed by the lamp. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed, and for the first time in years, his agreement felt like a vow. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. The townhouse settled. Somewhere in its quiet wires, that message waited, patient as a trapped wasp, ready to rattle the glass the moment sunlight touched it, and to name what exactly the sender thought Silas could not protect. He let the screen dim. Somewhere a train threaded the Charles. He drew the curtains and told the house, "And not tonight." Then he breathed. Morning returned sharp and golden, the kind of Boston morning that feels fresher than it should after a night full of shadows. Sunlight spilled into the townhouse, warming the polished wood floors. The city beyond was already awake, delivery trucks humming, street vendors arranging flowers, joggers threading through puddles on Charles Street. Inside, however, the air still carried the weight of last night's intrusion attempt. Silas had not slept much. He had replayed the lock alerts in his mind again and again, hearing the faint chime that meant someone was trying to reach through his walls. The anonymous message still sat unopened on his phone. He resisted it deliberately, knowing that whoever sent it wanted to control his first thoughts of the day. Instead, he dressed, brewed coffee, and let the rich smell fill the house before anyone else stirred. Maribel entered quietly, her daughter still asleep in the guest room. She noticed the lines under Silas's eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders. "You didn't rest," she said softly, setting down a folded dish towel. "I rested enough," Silas replied, though his tone betrayed the lie. He poured her coffee without asking, then slid the cup toward her across the table. "Today we go to East Boston as planned. No delays." Maribel hesitated, then asked the question she knew he'd avoided all night. "Did you open it, the message?" Silas shook his head. "Not yet. Timing is power. I'll open it when I decide, not when they want me to." Her respect for him deepened, but so did her worry. She had learned long ago that shadows like to linger, and people with money attract both light and darkness. She wanted to believe that integrity could protect them, but last night had proven otherwise. An hour later, they set out. Silas chose to drive himself, sliding into the black SUV with a steadiness that seemed rehearsed. Maribel sat in the passenger seat. Talia buckled safely in the back, humming as she held a stuffed rabbit. From the outside, they looked like an ordinary family on a morning outing. From the inside, each of them carried the memory of a threat hanging in the digital air. The East Boston Community Center rose from an aging block near the docks, its bricks faded but its spirit vibrant. Children's chalk drawings decorated the sidewalk. Suns, rockets, hearts. The smell of sea salt mingled with fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Inside, the lobby buzzed with life. Children tumbling across mats in the gym, parents waiting for English classes, volunteers stacking donated books. The director, a woman named Loretta, greeted them with a smile wide enough to brighten the dim fluorescent light. She wore sneakers, a hoodie with the center's logo, and the kind of energy that comes from living a mission instead of speaking it. "Mr. Ward," she said warmly, shaking his hand, "and you must be Maribel. Thank you for coming. We don't get many billionaires crossing the bridge unless there's a photo op." "No cameras today," Silas assured her. "I'm here to listen." And he did. He toured the classrooms, stopping to watch a boy fix a broken toy truck with careful hands. He asked parents about their needs. He bent down to listen to children explain their drawings. Each detail hit him harder than he expected. These weren't numbers on a ledger. They were lives being held together by fragile threads, by people who chose honesty and effort even when the world gave them little in return. Maribel noticed the way Silas's face softened as he watched Talia join a group of children building towers out of mismatched blocks. For the first time, she saw him not as the guarded man in the penthouse, but as someone remembering where he came from, someone remembering the grease-stained hands of his father. As they left, Loretta handed him a worn notebook filled with supply requests. "We don't ask for luxuries," she said, "just what keeps the doors open." Silas accepted it with the same care one might give a sacred object. "You'll have more than what's on this list," he promised. But as they walked back to the SUV, Silas noticed a detail he couldn't ignore. Parked across the street, angled just enough to see the entrance, sat the same black sedan from the night before. The glass was too dark to read a face, but Silas felt the gaze. Damon Kincaid's presence, whether real or implied, was undeniable. Maribel saw it too. She reached for Talia's hand instinctively, pulling her closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He's following us." "Good," Silas replied, opening the car door. "Let him. It means he wants us to know, and if he wants us to know, he's impatient. Impatience always cracks first." They drove off, the sedan slipping into traffic a few cars back. Silence filled the SUV except for the gentle hum of tires on asphalt, and Talia singing quietly to her rabbit. Silas's mind worked like gears, calculating risks, weighing options. He had lived long enough in a world where threats came with contracts and smiles. But this was different. This was direct, invasive, and personal. As they crossed the bridge, his phone buzzed again. Another message, this one shorter, colder. He glanced at the preview on the screen. "Family changes everything." Silas tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his jaw set. He didn't open it, not yet, but the words cut through him all the same. The safe in his office had once been the test. Now the real test was outside these walls, testing whether he could protect not just his fortune, but the fragile trust that had bloomed in the most unexpected corner of his life. And deep down, he knew the battle had only just begun. The afternoon sun slanted low over the Charles, painting the water with broken gold. By the time Silas drove them back into Beacon Hill, the city's rhythm had shifted into its early evening hum. Dog walkers, students, and couples filling the narrow sidewalks. The black sedan had peeled away a few blocks earlier, vanishing into the tide of cars, but its absence didn't calm Maribel. If anything, it made her unease worse. Inside the townhouse, the quiet felt heavier than usual. The new lock's faint hum seemed louder, like a reminder that safety could be breached even when reinforced. Talia bounded upstairs to fetch her crayons, her little voice echoing as she sang about castles made of blocks. Maribel set her purse down slowly, then faced Silas across the kitchen island. "Mr. Ward," she began, the formal tone slipping back in out of nerves. "This isn't just business anymore. Whoever that man is, he's circling us. He knows I'm here. He knows my daughter is here." Silas poured water into a glass, his movement steady, though his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. "I know," he said, "and you're right. It changes the calculation." He set the glass down with deliberate care. "But I also know something else. Fear is exactly what he wants. If we let fear guide us, he wins before we even start." Maribel's hands trembled as she clasped them together. "I don't want Talia growing up around shadows. She deserves light. She deserves to be a child." Silas leaned against the counter, studying her face. There was fire in her voice, the kind he admired. "She is a child, and last night she showed more courage than most executives who sit across my desk. Do you know what I thought, watching her close that safe?" Maribel shook her head. That I wanted to protect that purity at any cost, Silas said, his voice low, almost raw. Not because she's part of your family or part of my household, but because she represents what's left of the world that isn't broken by greed. His words struck something in her, something she hadn't expected. She had spent years feeling invisible in other people's homes, cleaning quietly, unseen. But now she was standing in the eye of someone's promise, and it frightened her as much as it stirred her heart. A chime from the lock broke the silence. Silas straightened instantly, but this time it was Arya, the locksmith, who entered carrying a slim black case. "I came as fast as I could," she said. "You've been poked again. 3 more attempts, same digital signature." "Let me guess," Silas muttered. "They want us to feel them breathing down our necks." "Exactly," Arya said, flipping open her case to reveal tools, wires, and a laptop glowing faintly. "But here's the thing. Attackers always overreach. This one's sloppy. They want to rattle you more than they want access." Maribel exhaled shakily. "So we're not in danger?" Arya paused, meeting her eyes. "Not tonight. But make no mistake, the line's been drawn. He's telling you he can reach the doorknob whenever he wants." Silas's jaw clenched. "Then we show him something he doesn't expect. We don't hide." Talia padded back into the room, clutching a drawing of the safe with a huge, crooked heart around it. She plopped it on the counter proudly. "See? Safe heart." Arya smiled faintly. "Out of the mouths of babes." Silas crouched to Talia's level, his expression softening. "That's perfect, Talia. You know what this means?" She tilted her head, curls bouncing. "What?" "That no matter how strong people think they are, the strongest thing in this house is honesty." Maribel's eyes burned with tears. She tried to blink away. She wasn't sure if it was fear, pride, or exhaustion, but in that moment, she felt something take root. Silas wasn't just trying to protect them. He was beginning to believe they were protecting him too, in a way he hadn't known he needed. Arya closed her case with a snap. "I'll reinforce the system, but you should be ready for escalation. He'll want to know how you'll respond." Silas stood, his eyes steady. "Then let him wait. I'll answer when I decide, not when he rattles the cage." The house settled back into quiet, but Maribel sensed the shift. Trust was no longer just a test in an office with a half-open safe. It had become the thread binding them together, against a force that wanted to break it. And as Silas walked into his study, phone still buzzing with unanswered messages, she knew the next move would define not just his future, but hers and her daughter's. The night crept in slowly, bringing with it the promise of confrontation. And though none of them spoke it out loud, the truth lingered in every glance, every silence, every heartbeat. The real test was only beginning. The next dawn arrived pale and metallic, the kind of light that slips between blinds like thin knives. Silas stood at the tall window of his study, sipping black coffee, his reflection caught in the glass, a man outwardly in control, yet with storm clouds tightening inside his chest. The phone sat on the desk behind him, the unopened messages glowing like small threats. He had always prided himself on being unshakable, but now the weight of responsibility felt different. He wasn't only guarding investments or contracts, he was guarding 2 lives that had unexpectedly become part of his own. Maribel entered quietly, carrying Talia, who was still half asleep, her curls matted from dreams. She set the child down on the sofa and draped a blanket over her before turning to Silas. "You didn't close your eyes all night, did you?" He didn't answer immediately, still staring at the skyline bruised with early fog. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about how trust makes you stronger and weaker at the same time. Stronger because it builds alliances, weaker because it gives enemies a lever." Maribel's gaze softened. "And you think letting us in has given him leverage?" Silas turned then, his eyes sharper than the light around him. "I don't regret it, but I need to be sure you understand what it means. Kincaid doesn't play games, he weaponizes pressure, and he's noticed you." Her breath caught. "You're saying he'll come after me?" "I'm saying," Silas said slowly, "that he'll test you the way I tested your daughter. Only his test won't be harmless." The words chilled her, but she straightened her shoulders. "Then let him." "I've lived through worse storms than a man in a black car." There was no bravado in her tone, just quiet truth, the voice of someone who had endured poverty, judgment, invisibility. Silas studied her for a moment longer, then nodded, as if conceding to her resilience. Later that morning, the three of them drove to East Boston again, this time with supplies Silas had arranged overnight: boxes of new books, art supplies, and refurbished laptops. Loretta, the community center director, greeted them with astonished gratitude. Children swarmed the boxes, their laughter filling the air like birdsong. Maribel watched Silas interact with them, kneeling to tie a boy's shoe, listening intently as a girl explained her painting of a lighthouse. There was something disarming about him here, far from the fortress of his townhouse and the gleam of boardrooms. She realized he wasn't only giving money, he was giving time, attention, pieces of himself that he didn't offer easily. But even in the brightness of the center, the shadow followed. Across the street, parked once again, was the black sedan. This time the driver leaned casually against the hood, smoking as if he owned the block. When Silas noticed, his jaw clenched, but he didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone and finally opened one of the waiting messages. It was a photo, grainy, taken from a distance. Maribel and Talia walking out of the townhouse, hand in hand. Beneath it, a line of text. "Everything you care about now belongs to the game." Silas's pulse spiked. He slipped the phone back into his pocket before Maribel could see, though she caught the flicker in his expression. She knew instantly. "He sent something, didn't he?" Silas nodded once. "But he's already lost by showing his hand." "What did it say?" His silence was answer enough. On the drive back, Talia hummed in the back seat, holding a paper crown one of the children had made for her. Maribel sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the blur of the city passing outside. Silas's knuckles whitened on the wheel. He wanted to shield them, to carry the burden alone, but deep down he knew that wasn't what trust meant. Trust was shared weight. When they reached the townhouse, Arya was waiting on the steps with her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. "He's escalating," she said before Silas could speak. "Not just poking the lock anymore. He's trying to map the entire building. I caught him bouncing signals through public Wi-Fi. Sloppy but dangerous." Maribel's voice trembled. "Why us? Why involve me and my daughter?" "Because you matter to me now," Silas admitted, the words raw and stripped. "And he knows that makes you my weakness." The admission left Maribel breathless. She didn't answer, but her silence was louder than words. Arya adjusted her glasses, looking between them. "Then you have a choice. Keep hiding, hoping he loses interest. Or step into the open, show him you're not afraid." Silas glanced toward the street where the sedan had been. Empty now, but its absence was louder than its presence. He turned back, his voice steady. "No more hiding." He knew the game had changed. The test of trust had become a battle for it, and every move from here would either strengthen or shatter the fragile bond he was building with Maribel and her daughter. And as night approached once more, Silas realized the real confrontation was no longer avoidable. Kincaid would force his hand soon, and when he did, the stakes wouldn't be money, they would be family. The city's evening lights flickered awake one by one, like stars daring to compete with the night sky. Silas's townhouse glowed softly from within, yet for all its warmth, the house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a chessboard. He moved deliberately through the rooms, checking doors, glancing at the hum of the smart lock, scanning the street from the tall windows. The sedan wasn't there tonight, or maybe that was the trick. The absence itself felt like a presence. Maribel sat in the living room with a book open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Talia lay curled against her side, drifting in and out of sleep. Every creak of the old house made Maribel tense, her eyes darting toward the door. Finally, she looked at Silas and said the words she'd been holding back all day. "I can't keep her safe if this continues. My daughter deserves peace, not shadows following us." Her voice quivered, but her eyes were steady. "Tell me honestly, are we in danger?" Silas turned, his expression unreadable for a moment before softening. "Yes," he said plainly, "but not in the way you think. Kincaid thrives on fear. He wants you to believe you're already trapped, that I can't protect you. The real danger is letting him control our choices. Maribel swallowed hard. And what if he forces a choice we can't refuse? Then we make one he doesn't expect, Silas replied. As if on cue, his phone buzzed again. Another message. He hesitated, then opened it. This time it was a single sentence. One of your own has already opened the door. Silas's pulse hammered. He showed the screen to Arya, who had set up camp in the study with her laptop and cables spread like a surgical kit. Her eyes narrowed. Classic misdirection, she muttered. He wants you doubting everyone around you. But doubt was already clawing at Silas's mind. Who could Kincaid mean? A vendor? A driver? Someone from his own staff? He had built his empire on detecting lies, but tonight the shadows seemed thicker than ever. Maribel sensed his turmoil and stepped closer. Don't let him poison what you already know is true, she said softly. You tested me. You tested my daughter. You saw what you needed to see. Hold on to that. Her words grounded him. He exhaled slowly, the storm inside easing. You're right, he said, almost to himself. He can take my sleep, but he won't take my trust. Just then, Talia stirred and sat up, her voice groggy but clear. Why is everyone whispering? She asked, rubbing her eyes. Maribel kissed her forehead. Just grown-up things, mi amor. Go back to sleep. But Talia shook her head stubbornly. I can help. She padded over to the study desk, where her crayon drawing of the safe still sat. She pointed at the big heart she had drawn around it. See? Safe heart. That means even if someone knocks, it stays closed, because love is inside. The room went silent. Silas stared at the child, realizing that in her innocence, she had spoken the truth he had nearly forgotten. The only defense against manipulation was holding tighter to what was real. Arya cleared her throat, returning to her laptop. I've traced the latest attempt, she said. Not to a stranger on the street. This signal came from inside one of your old company servers. He's burrowed deep, feeding off your past. If we're going to fight this, we'll need to go there. Silas's jaw set. Then that's where we'll go. Maribel's eyes widened. You mean leave this house? Confront him on his ground? Silas nodded. The only way to end a shadow is to drag it into the light. Talia, still clutching her rabbit, piped up innocently. Can I come? Both adults answered in unison. No. The firmness made her giggle, but it also settled the moment. Maribel touched Silas's arm, her voice quiet. If you go, don't go alone. If trust means anything, let it include me too. Silas looked at her, at the strength burning quietly behind her fear. And for the first time, he realized she wasn't just someone he was protecting, she was someone who could stand beside him. The house fell into silence again, but this time it was a silence full of decision. Tomorrow everything would move. The battle was no longer about gold bars or open safes. It was about hearts, trust, and whether purity could stand firm against corruption. And as Silas closed the curtains for the night, he knew with certainty Kincaid wasn't going to stop knocking. It was time to open the door, on their terms. The morning arrived wrapped in grey clouds, the kind of sky that promised rain but withheld it like a secret. Silas dressed in silence, his movements clipped and precise, a man preparing not for business as usual, but for confrontation. He checked his watch, slid his phone into his pocket, and stood at the threshold of his study as if weighing the battlefield ahead. Maribel watched him from the kitchen, tension etched into her posture. She set a plate of scrambled eggs on the counter, but didn't touch her own. You've already decided, she said, more statement than question. Silas nodded once. Arya traced the breach. It came from one of my old server farms. Kincaid isn't just knocking on my lock. He's digging into the bones of what I built. If I don't cut him off there, he'll keep feeding. Maribel's hands tightened around her coffee mug. And what if going there is exactly what he wants? Then I'll give him what he wants, Silas said, his voice low, but not in the way he expects. Talia wandered in, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, her rabbit tucked under her arm. Where are you going? She asked, climbing onto a stool. Silas forced a smile. To fix a broken machine, little one. Machines need hearts too, she said matter-of-factly, echoing her drawing from days before. The words hit Silas harder than any threat Kincaid could send. He reached over, smoothing her curls. You're right, they do. By late morning, the SUV rolled out of Beacon Hill. Arya sat in the back seat with her laptop, cables trailing like veins into a portable modem. Maribel rode up front, her eyes scanning every car that lingered too long in the mirrors. The city blurred past, bridges, brick warehouses, graffiti-tagged walls, until they pulled into the industrial district where one of Silas's oldest data facilities stood, a squat concrete building that hummed with hidden electricity. The parking lot was nearly empty. A lone van idled near the far fence, its driver invisible behind tinted glass. Silas noted it, his jaw tightening. Eyes open, he murmured. Inside, the air was cold, metallic, and dry. Rows of servers blinked in steady rhythm, the sound of fans whirring like a mechanical tide. It was a place built for silence, not people. Yet here they were, stepping into the belly of his empire's history. Arya plugged in immediately, her fingers dancing across the keys. Green code scrolled fast, chasing shadows through networks. He's in here, she muttered. Not physically, but his footprint is everywhere. He left himself loud on purpose. Wants us to know. Maribel stood close to Silas, her unease growing with every echo in the cavernous room. Why does it feel like we're being watched? Because we are, Silas answered quietly. He gestured toward the ceiling, where a single red light blinked in a corner camera. This building's security was patched years ago, but Kincaid probably owns those eyes now. As if summoned by his words, Silas's phone buzzed again. He pulled it out. This time, the message wasn't just text, it was live. A video feed. The screen showed them, Silas, Maribel, Arya, standing in the server room at that very moment, captured from the corner camera above. Beneath it, a caption appeared. You bring them into your world, and now they're mine too. Maribel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Arya cursed under her breath and hammered the keyboard. He's routing through 6 proxies. Give me 5 minutes. Silas's calm cracked, his anger sharp as glass. He turned off the feed and shoved the phone into his pocket. Enough of this. He strode deeper into the server rows, his footsteps echoing. He stopped in front of a console, keyed in his override access, and began pulling up old directories, financial, legal, personal. All of it was vulnerable if left alive. What are you doing? Maribel asked, alarmed. Cutting ties with the past, Silas said, his voice grim. If Kincaid wants to use my history against me, then I'll burn the history. Arya looked up from her laptop, eyes wide. Wait, you're talking about a purge. Once you wipe this, there's no bringing it back. You'll lose years of records, leverage, everything. Then I lose it, Silas snapped. I'd rather watch it vanish on my terms than let him weaponize it against the people I care about. The room went still. The fans roared, lights blinked, code scrolled. But in that moment, everything narrowed to a single decision. Silas's hand hovered over the confirmation key, ready to erase what had taken decades to build. Maribel stepped forward, placing her hand over his. Her eyes locked onto his with a steady fire. Don't let him force you to destroy yourself. That's his game. You can protect us without losing who you are. Silas froze. Her hand was warm, grounding. For a long second, the weight of choice pressed down on him. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand. He didn't hit the key. Instead, he looked at Arya. Rewrote everything. Build a decoy system. Let him chase ghosts while we keep the real heart safe. Relief flickered in Arya's eyes as she nodded and turned back to the screen. Maribel exhaled, her grip loosening, but not leaving his hand entirely. The red camera light in the corner blinked again, almost mocking. But this time Silas stared directly at it, his voice steady. You don't own this story, Kincaid. Not now. Not ever. For the first time, he wasn't reacting to the test. He was setting it. The drive back from the server facility was hushed. Though silence wasn't empty, it was packed tight with unsaid fears and sharpened resolve. The rain that had threatened all day finally arrived, streaking across the windshield in hurried silver lines. Boston blurred outside, neon bleeding into puddles, headlights glowing like restless eyes. Talia slept in the back seat, her little hand clutching the ear of her rabbit. Maribel kept twisting the edge of her scarf in her lap, her thoughts running ahead to questions she couldn't voice. What if Kincaid came closer? What if he didn't just send messages but crossed their threshold? Could Silas really keep them safe? Silas gripped the wheel tighter, jaw clenched. The purge he almost committed still weighed on him. He could still see the confirmation screen, the temptation to destroy decades of his past with one keystroke. But Maribel's hand, steady, insistent, had pulled him back. He owed her more than he could articulate. When they finally pulled into the townhouse garage, Arya closed her laptop with a decisive snap. "Decoys live," she announced. "Every path Kincaid tries from now on will lead him into a maze. He'll think he's seeing your empire's heart, but all he'll touch are shadows we built for him." "Will it hold?" Silas asked. "As long as he thinks he's winning," Arya said. "But be warned, men like him don't settle for digital battles. If he doesn't get what he wants here, he'll push into your life." Silas met her gaze in the rearview mirror. Then he'll find out what happens when he pushes too far. Inside, the townhouse felt different. It no longer carried the hushed calm of a sanctuary. It was a citadel now, and every creak felt like an alarm. Maribel tucked Talia into bed upstairs, smoothing the quilt with trembling fingers. The girl stirred, whispering, half asleep. "Safe heart, Mama." Maribel bent down, kissing her forehead. "Always, mi amor." When she returned to the study, Silas stood at the window, the city lights painting his profile in fractured colors. "He sent another message," he said without turning. Her breath caught. "What now?" He finally looked at her, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen. He handed her the phone. On the screen was a photo, her, taken earlier that day at the community center. She was bent over helping a child tie his shoelace, her smile soft, unguarded. Beneath the image, a line of text. "She belongs to my world now." Maribel's knees almost buckled. She steadied herself on the edge of the desk, her chest heaving. "He's watching us everywhere," she whispered. "There's no line he won't cross." Silas crossed the room quickly, placing his hands gently but firmly on her shoulders. "No, listen to me. That's what he wants you to believe, that you're already trapped, already his. But you're not. You're here with me, and I swear to you I will not let him touch you or Talia." Tears welled in her eyes, but she held his gaze. "Why us, Silas? Why pull us into this? Because trust isn't a luxury anymore, it's survival," he said, his voice breaking through the weight of silence. "And you and your daughter, you've shown me a truth I didn't know I was starving for. You're the reason I remember what I'm fighting for." The room hung between danger and something unspoken, something fragile but undeniable. For a moment, it felt as though the storm outside had quieted, as though the city itself was listening. But then Arya's voice cut through from the hallway, sharp and urgent. "We've got movement!" Silas and Maribel rushed out to find her staring at the security panel. Red lights pulsed across the display, motion detected in the alley near the back entrance. Silas's instincts sharpened in an instant. "How many?" "2 figures, maybe 3, Arya said, typing rapidly. "No weapons visible, but they're casing the property." Maribel's blood ran cold. "He's here." Silas took a deep breath, steady but fierce. "Then the waiting is over." He turned back toward the hallway where Talia slept soundly under her quilt, unaware of the storm brewing outside. His expression hardened, his voice low and certain. "If Kincaid wants to test me, tonight he learns I don't break." The hum of the rain deepened against the windows. The house held its breath. And for the first time, Silas wasn't just defending his wealth or his pride. He was defending something far greater. A promise. The storm broke fully that night, sheets of rain thrashing against Beacon Hill's narrow streets, thunder rolling low and restless above the city. Inside the townhouse, every creak of the old bones felt amplified, every shadow lengthened by lightning that fractured the windows with sudden light. The security panel pulsed red, warning of figures lingering just beyond the alley gate. Arya hunched over her laptop on the kitchen island, the glow painting her face in pale blue. "They're circling," she muttered, "not trying to force entry yet, just making sure we know they're out there." Maribel hovered near the staircase, one hand pressed to the banister, The other clutched tight against her chest. She could feel her own heartbeat in her throat. Upstairs, Talia slept in the guest room, curled under her quilt with her rabbit tucked beneath her chin. Every instinct in Maribel screamed to grab her daughter and run, but there was nowhere safe to run if the threat followed. Silas stood in the study doorway, his figure sharp against the glow of the city lights beyond. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a fire Maribel hadn't seen before. He had the look of a man who had spent his life in boardrooms, crushing rivals with contracts and leverage. But tonight he was stripped of lawyers and walls of wealth. Tonight he was nothing more than a man drawing a line in his own home. "They want us rattled," Silas said, his voice low but steady. "They want fear to do their work for them, but we don't play their game." A crash of thunder shook the house. Maribel flinched. "And if fear doesn't work?" she asked. "What then?" "Then they'll escalate," Arya answered grimly. "But that's where we turn it on them. I set the decoy to route back here. If they try to break in tonight, we'll see exactly what tools they're using, exactly who they are." Maribel's hands trembled. "You're baiting them." Silas stepped closer, his voice firm. "No, I'm showing them the truth, that we are not afraid." Another chime pulsed from the panel, movement closer now, right at the gate. The camera flicked on, and a grainy black and white feed filled the screen. 3 men stood in the alley, their shoulders hunched against the rain. They weren't rushing, weren't hiding, they were waiting. One of them looked directly into the lens, his face shadowed beneath a hood. Even through the distortion, Silas recognized the smirk. Damon Kincaid. Maribel gasped, her voice a whisper. He came himself. Silas stared at the screen, his jaw like stone. "Good. That means he's impatient." The men didn't move closer. They lingered just long enough for the message to settle, then turned and disappeared back into the rain. The panel blinked green again, the house once more in its uneasy quiet. Maribel sagged against the banister, her knees weak. Why show himself and then leave? "Because he wants me to know this isn't over," Silas said. "He wants me waiting for the next knock." Arya closed her laptop with a frustrated sigh. "He's testing boundaries. Next time he won't stop at the gate." Silas turned away from the screen, his eyes settling on Maribel. She was pale, shaken, but there was steel in her voice when she spoke. "Then we prepare, for Talia's sake." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I swore to you I'd protect you both, and I will. But it won't be enough to react anymore. We need to move first." Her eyes widened. "You mean confront him?" "Yes," Silas said simply. "On ground we choose. Not here, not in this house. I won't let him turn these walls into a prison." The weight of his words filled the room. Maribel searched his face, and for the first time she didn't just see a billionaire protecting his assets. She saw a man standing for something larger than himself. "Upstairs," Talia murmured in her sleep, her little voice drifting down the hallway. "Safe heart." Maribel's throat tightened. She turned back to Silas, her fear and resolve woven together. "Then wherever you go, I go, because if this fight is about trust, you don't fight it alone." Silas's eyes held hers for a long moment. Lightning flashed, thunder cracked, and the unspoken vow between them sealed itself in the silence that followed. Outside, the storm howled like a warning. Inside, a fragile but unyielding alliance was forged. And when the rain finally eased, the choice remained. Either keep waiting for the next knock or open the door themselves. The house was still, though silence did not mean peace. After Kincaid's shadow had passed from the alley, the night pressed heavy against the windows, leaving Silas, Maribel, and little Talia in a fragile calm. Yet within that calm stirred a deeper truth, one that could not be answered with locks, servers, or wealth. Silas sat at the edge of his study, the sticky note with Talia's crooked heart still clinging to the wall above the safe. His eyes lingered on it as though it were a scripture in its own right, whispering of something stronger than steel or gold. "Trust," he murmured almost to himself. "It's the one thing that can't be stolen." Maribel, seated nearby, tilted her head. "Trust," she repeated softly. "It is what God asks of us, isn't it?" Her words landed like a stone in still water, rippling into the silence. For all the danger and fear circling them, the story unfolding wasn't only about threats or tests, it was about the choice to cling to what is unseen yet unshakable. Silas leaned back, his voice lower now, searching. "All my life I thought security was measured in walls, money, deals, but last night proved none of that is enough. What holds us together is something deeper, something Kincaid can't touch." Maribel nodded, her eyes glistening. "The Bible says, 'The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?' Psalm 27:1. The words filled the room with a strength that outshone the storm. She continued, her voice steady. "God doesn't promise we'll never face shadows. He promises His presence will be stronger than any shadow. That's what gives us courage, not our power, but His." Silas listened in silence, the verse echoing within him. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of surrender, not to a rival, not to fear, but to something greater than himself. Maribel's hand rested gently on Talia's curls as she whispered, "Jesus said, 'Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid.' John 14:27. That peace doesn't come from locks or cameras. It comes from trusting that no matter what enemy prowls outside, God stands closer inside." The truth of it hung in the air, like the lingering scent of rain. Silas rose, walking to the window. Outside, the city glittered under wet streets, fragile but enduring. He pressed his hand against the cold glass. "If trust in God is stronger than fear," he said slowly, "then maybe what I've been missing isn't more defenses, but more faith." Maribel joined him at the window. "Faith doesn't mean the danger vanishes," she said gently. "It means we face it with courage, not our own. It means believing God can turn even an enemy's schemes into a testimony of His power." Silas turned toward her, his expression changed, not softer, but steadier. "Then maybe this test isn't just mine. Maybe it's God's way of asking me to stop depending only on myself." Talia stirred in her sleep, murmuring the words that had become her unshaken refrain. "Safe heart." And in that whisper it was clear, the real safe was not steel and gold hidden in the wall. It was the trust written on a child's note, sealed in a mother's faith, and anchored in God's word. The house, once heavy with fear, felt lighter now. Not because the threat was gone, but because they were no longer facing it alone. The next evening the storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean, the air sharp with salt from the harbor. The townhouse windows glowed warm against the deepening dusk, but inside the air still carried the memory of shadows. Silas stood in the study, one hand resting on the closed safe, the other holding Talia's crooked heart note. He had spent his life believing security was built with steel and fortune. Now he knew better. Maribel entered quietly, her footsteps soft against the rug. She carried 2 cups of tea, setting one down beside him. "The house feels different tonight," she said. Silas nodded. "Because we are different." He looked at her, his voice steady. "For years I've tested people to see if they could be trusted. But the truth is, I was the one being tested, and I nearly failed." Maribel studied him, her expression tender but firm. "You didn't fail. You learned." At that moment, Talia skipped in, her curls bouncing, her rabbit tucked under one arm. She held up a fresh drawing, 3 figures standing together inside a giant heart. Above it, in shaky letters, she had written, "Safe." Silas took the paper carefully, his throat tightening. "This," he said, holding it up, "is stronger than any lock. This is what He'll never take from us." A sudden knock rattled the door. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Silas exchanged a look with Maribel before striding toward the foyer. He opened it, not to Kincaid, not to shadows, but to Loretta from the community center, arms full of thank you cards drawn by children. "We wanted you to have these," she said brightly, "to remind you that what you did today matters." As she left, Silas flipped through the cards. Clumsy rainbows, stick figures holding hands, one scrawled message reading, "Thank you for seeing us." Maribel touched his arm. "Do you see now? The real wealth isn't in what you keep, but in what you give." Silas nodded, his eyes bright. "And in who you trust." For the first time in years, he felt unafraid of tomorrow. He knew Kincaid would return with schemes and threats, but he also knew now that no shadow could undo what had been built inside these walls: honesty, faith, love. He turned to Maribel and Talia, his voice sure. "Whatever comes next, we face it together, and together we don't break." Lightning no longer split the sky. Instead, stars emerged, one by one, steady and unshaken. And in that light, the test that began with an open safe ended with something no wealth could measure: a family forged not by blood or power, but by trust. If this story touched your heart, don't forget. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this message with someone who needs it. And when this video ends, another story will appear on your screen. Click and keep walking with us. You won't want to miss it.